The process of crafting a trap is more an act of ritual than of engineering. You are not just making a device, you are manifesting your will, turning your frustration into a physical object. You go out to the small woodpile you keep just outside your cottage door, the air cool and damp against your skin. You select a small, straight piece of oak, a gnarled length of wood that smells faintly of moss. This will be the base, back inside, by the flickering firelight. You pull a dull knife from your belt. The blade is scarred and pitted, having been used for everything from whittling to prying open stubborn knots. You begin to work, shaving away thin curls of wood that fall onto the dirt floor like tiny, pale snakes. The sound is a quiet, rhythmic shave, 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 a meditative act of focused aggression. Historians still debate whether these herbal remedies and folk cures were actually effective, or if they were simply a form of ritualistic pest control that provided a psychological comfort to the people who used them. Did the rats actually leave because of the smell of burnt horn? Or did they simply move to a different part of the cottage? Did the apple seed milk actually kill them? Or was it just a coincidence that the rats stopped appearing after a while? The sources are silent on the matter, and all we have are the recipes and the vague, often contradictory, accounts of their success. It's a fascinating question, and one that highlights the fine line between superstition and practical knowledge in the Middle Ages. For you, standing there with a small pouch of foul-smelling powder in your hand, it doesn't really matter. You're desperate enough to try anything. Hey guys, tonight we're not going to be talking about emperors or grand battles. We're going to talk about something much more intimate and, frankly, much scarier, the tiny, unseen invaders that shared your home. We're traveling back to a time when your house wasn't a fortress of solitude, but a flimsy, porous structure built from whatever was at hand. A place where the real battle for survival wasn't fought on a field of blood, but in the dark corners of your pantry. This isn't a story for the faint of heart, but if you think you'd have been a rugged, self-sufficient hero in the Middle Ages, I've got a surprise for you. The constant, low-level stress of keeping a rat out of your lunch would have probably broken you within a week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You return home with your prizes, the deliciously poisoned bait and the vile-smelling repellent. You carefully set the bait, a tiny, greasy morsel of death, in a place you know the cat can't get to. You then go back to the area behind the wardrobe, and you sprinkle the foul-smelling powder around the base of the furniture, the acrid smell filling your home with an unpleasant aroma. You can almost feel the rat's outrage. What is this they must be thinking? A rat's home is his castle. We will not stand for this. You go to bed that night, and you wait. The air is thick with the scent of burnt horn and fish oil, a strange, nauseating perfume of your own making. You feel a strange sense of peace. You have done all you can do. You have used your hands, your wits, your cat, and now the dark arts of the apothecary. You lie in your straw bed, and you can't help but think that if you ever get a moment of true, unadulterated peace, you will probably be too used to the constant low-level anxiety to even know what to do with it. But for tonight, the rats are quiet. The peace is fragile, but it is real. You stand on the packed earth floor of your home, and the air is thick and heavy. It smells of wood smoke and damp earth, of stale food and unwashed wool. You feel a constant, low-level hum of activity, a sense of being perpetually watched. It's not just the wind whistling through the cracks in the wattle and daub walls, it's the rustling in the thatch of the roof, the tiny, skittering footsteps you hear just on the other side of the mud plaster. You listen, not with alarm, but with a kind of weary resignation. This is your life. Your home is not your own. It is a shared ecosystem, and you, the human, are often not even at the top of the food chain. The silence in your cottage is still there, but it feels different now. It's no longer the fragile peace brought on by the rat catcher's terror or the apothecary's grim concoctions. Now it's the silence of a truce you know will not last. You've seen the rat repellent powder you sprinkled behind the wardrobe, now covered with a fine layer of dust and no rat footprints? You've had success. But a new threat has emerged. A scratching noise, higher up this time, coming from a newly made crevice near the roofline where a piece of thatch has come loose. You realize that you've been fighting a battle on the wrong front. You've been trying to kill the enemy, but you haven't been trying to keep them out. It's time to stop thinking like a hunter and start thinking like an architect. It's time to fortify your castle of clay. Your medieval home, a simple cottage, is a masterpiece of unintentional rodent hospitality. The walls, made of woven twigs and branches, plastered with a mix of mud, clay, and straw known as wattle and daub, are a literal network of highways for creatures small enough to squeeze through. They provide endless nooks and crannies for nesting, and the straw in the mixture is a delicious, chewable treat. You can run your hand along the rough, uneven surface, feeling the cool, slightly damp texture, and you know that just on the other side, a family of mice is building a cozy new nursery. The floor itself, often nothing more than hard-packed dirt, is pockmarked with tiny, half-hidden burrows. When you stir in the night, you are often careful not to put your bare foot down, lest you step on something that will let out a high-pitched squeal and then bite you. You stand back from your home, a simple one-room structure, and you really look at it for the first time. It's a testament to practicality, not permanence. A wattle and daub wall, a thatch roof, a packed earth floor. It's a masterpiece of unintentional rodent hospitality. Your walls, made of twigs and mud, are essentially a giant, edible bird's nest. To a rat, it's not a barrier, it's a menu. So, your first order of business is to make the walls less delicious. You go to the local riverbed and begin the back-breaking work of gathering stones. They are cold, smooth, and heavy, and you carry them back to your cottage, 2 by 2, your back aching with every step. You mix a new batch of daub, this time with a bit of bone meal and sharp shards of pottery mixed in. This will make the plaster harder and less appealing to gnaw through. You feel a bit like a medieval home security expert, adding a new layer of deterrent to your defenses. You're not just building a wall, you're building a wall that says, "Don't even try it, a pal." The constant gnawing presence of these creatures is a common historical fact of medieval life. It wasn't a nuisance, it was an existential threat. They didn't just eat your food, they ate all of your food. A single small family of rats could ruin a winter's worth of grain stored in a sack in the corner. You might be a wealthy merchant with a larder full of provisions. But if you don't have a plan for the rats, you're just a glorified food delivery service. The sounds become a constant background noise. A scratching behind the heavy wooden chest where you keep your best linens. A soft squeak from a dark corner as 2 of them fight over a dropped crumb of stale bread. You try to ignore it, to focus on the flickering light of the tallow candle you've just lit. But the awareness of their presence is like a faint, persistent ache in your bones. You begin to apply the new plaster, your hands thick with the cold, sticky mud. The texture is different now, rougher, more abrasive. You press it into the small holes and cracks you find, a methodical, repetitive act of patching and mending. The little pieces of bone and pottery catch the light, a series of tiny, angry glints in your walls. This is your personal shield wall, a physical barrier against the unending tide of scurrying life. A common historical fact of medieval life is that a homeowner's responsibility often extended to the maintenance of their own dwelling, and this included making it as pest-proof as possible. You couldn't just call a landlord. You were the landlord, the tenant, and the maintenance crew, all rolled into one. The constant, low-level labor of keeping a medieval home together was a full-time job. And you realize you have a newfound appreciation for the people who managed to keep their home standing and, more importantly, rat-free. You're trying to mend a torn tunic. The rough linen fibers stiff in your hands. You set the needle and thread down for a moment to warm your hands over the small, central hearth. When you look back, the spool of thread has been knocked over, and a tiny, clean bite has been taken out of a crust of bread you had been saving for later. The audacity. It's a small thing, but it's another victory for them. Another reminder that they are always watching, always waiting. It's enough to make you mutter a curse under your breath, a frustration you know is utterly pointless. But the walls are only part of the problem. The floor is another. Your floor. A simple layer of hard-packed earth is a literal welcome mat for any creature that can burrow. It's warm, it's soft, and it's a direct tunnel to the foundation of your home. You need to raise it. You spend the next few days in a back-breaking effort of digging and leveling, and then you bring in a new, more permanent material stone. You lay down a series of flat, heavy flagstones, each one a massive effort to move. You feel like a modern-day construction worker, but your tools are a simple pry bar and your own brute strength. The stones are cold and hard, a stark contrast to the soft, giving earth you've been walking on your entire life. This is a fortress you are building, a permanent physical barrier between you and the scurrying world beneath your feet. Your roof is even worse. It's a thick layer of thatch, a beautiful insulating cap of woven straw, and reeds that keeps the rain out and the heat in. But to a rat, it's a luxury apartment complex, a 5-star resort with all-you-can-eat bedding. They live up there, in a little city of their own, dropping dried bits of who knows what down onto your head while you sleep. You're trying to tell a joke to your family about how the rats in the attic have a better social life than you do, but the punchline is lost to a faint scurrying sound, and everyone just looks up at the ceiling with the same tired expression. Your home isn't a safe space, it's a contested territory, a constant, low-stakes war for resources. You even go so far as to build a small, raised platform of wood in the corner where you keep your grain sacks. This is an important detail, a piece of architectural ingenuity that speaks to the constant struggle against rats. A sack of grain, no matter how carefully tied, is just a buffet to a rat. But if the sack is raised, and the platform is slick and smooth, it's much harder for them to climb. You carefully chisel the edges of the wooden platform, making them smooth and rounded, a deliberate act of anti-rat engineering. You're not just building a platform, you're building a defensive structure, a tiny rampart for your food. You think to yourself that this is probably why all modern kitchen cabinets are raised off the ground. Someone somewhere was just really tired of finding rat droppings in their cupboards. This leads us to a truly bizarre and often misunderstood detail of medieval folklore, the Rat King. Now, you've probably heard this term before, but its meaning was far more terrifying to a medieval peasant than it is to you. A Rat King is a phenomenon where a group of rats, sometimes as few as 3, sometimes a dozen or more, become physically tangled together by their tails. This knot is often solidified with dried blood, feces, or other debris, and it results in a monstrous, multi-headed creature unable to move as a single unit. The sight of a Rat King was considered an omen of the highest order, a harbinger of imminent plague, famine, and general disaster. It was seen as a grotesque abomination, a perversion of nature itself, and its discovery would have sent a wave of panic and dread through any community. The very idea that these creatures could coalesce into a single, terrifying entity speaks to the level of fear they inspired. This leads us to an interesting and often overlooked detail, the strategic placement of your hearth. Your hearth, the very center of your home, is not just a source of warmth and light, it's a key part of your pest control strategy. The area around it is often paved with stone, and the heat from the fire would make it an inhospitable place for a rat to burrow. It's an unspoken agreement. The rats can have the cold, damp edges of your cottage, but the warm, dry center is yours. The hearth is the heart of your home, and it's also the front line in your war against the rats. You look at the fire, its flames dancing and flickering, and you feel a sense of security you haven't felt in a long time. It's not just keeping you warm, it's keeping you safe. In fact, historians still debate whether rat kings were a naturally occurring phenomenon or a result of deliberate human manipulation for propaganda or fear. Some scholars argue that the conditions for tales becoming so entangled would be rare, suggesting that desperate peasants or opportunistic charlatans may have created them to inspire fear or as a macabre art form. The debate underscores just how deeply these creatures were woven into the psychological fabric of the era, capable of inspiring not just revulsion but superstitious terror. Historians still debate whether these architectural details were a conscious and deliberate effort to combat rats, or if they were simply a happy side effect of other needs. Did peasants raise their floors to keep the rats out? Or did they do it to keep their feet out of the damp, cold earth? Did they make their hearths of stone to keep the rats away? Or did they do it to prevent their homes from burning down? It's a fascinating question, and one that we will likely never have a definitive answer to. It's a question of intentionality, A debate that highlights the fine line between function and conscious design. For you, standing there with your newly fortified home, the answer doesn't matter. You've done all you can do, and the result is a home that feels a little more like a home and a little less like a shared ecosystem. You've learned to be a lighter sleeper. Every creak, every rustle, every soft thud is a potential threat. You're not worried about a large, scary monster. You're worried about something small and fast and full of disease that is trying to get into your flour sack. There's a constant background vigilance, a mental tax you pay every single day. A modern person in your situation would probably be driven mad within a month. You can't just call an exterminator. You can't just set a few traps and forget about them. Your battle against the rats is a lifelong, grueling, and mostly losing campaign. You lie in your small bed on a straw mattress that probably has its own little ecosystem of scurrying life, and you feel the cold air on your face. You hear the sounds of the night, and you know that somewhere in the darkness, a pair of tiny, bright eyes is watching you, waiting for you to fall asleep so they can get to work. It's a strange comfort to know that you are not alone in the night, but it's a terrible kind of company. You just hope they don't decide to get adventurous and go for the tiny bag of salt you have hidden under your pillow. They probably already know it's there. You've patched the walls, you've raised the floor, and you've made your hearth a no-go zone. You look around, and for the first time in a long time, you feel a sense of ownership. A sense that this place, this small, simple cottage, is truly yours. The silence is no longer a fragile truce, it's a victory. The scratching is gone, the gnawing is gone, and the constant low-level anxiety that has been your constant companion is finally blessedly quiet. You lie down on your bed, on your straw mattress that now feels a little safer, and you listen to the sounds of the night. The wind is whistling through the cracks, but you know there's nothing in them. You hear the faint hoot of an owl, a natural predator that you now see as an ally. You close your eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, you sleep. You sleep a deep, dreamless sleep, a true and genuine rest that you have earned with your own hands, your own sweat, and your own weary resolve. And you think to yourself that maybe, just maybe, you might survive this after all. The scratching behind your wattle and daub wall is louder tonight. A relentless, tiny drumming that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. You found another tiny, perfect bite mark on the soap you used to wash your hands. A small crater of disrespect that feels deeply personal. The rats aren't just hungry, they're brazen. They are winning the passive war of coexistence. The one you hope to fight with just your wits and a few well-placed sacks is a bust. It's time for a new tactic. You can feel the quiet resolve settling in your gut. Tonight, you're going to build a trap. You're going to fight back. The walls of your home, with their gritty new layer of pottery and bone, have held firm. The rat repellent powder has done its job. For a while, the silence was a true and beautiful thing. You slept a little better. Your cat, that purring monster, had to look a little harder for its prey. And your pantry felt, for the first time, truly yours. But a sound has returned. It is not the scratching from the wall, but a new, more unsettling sound, a faint, high-pitched squeaking from somewhere deep beneath the floorboards. A sound that echoes in the stillness of the night. It's not just a physical problem anymore, it feels more like a haunting. You've used your hands. You've used your cat. You've used the dark arts of the apothecary. It's time to call in a higher power. You need a trigger mechanism. The simplest, most effective design is a delicate balance of tension and leverage. You find a small, thin strip of wood, a bit of dried kindling you've set aside. This will be the bait holder, the tiny scaffold upon which you will lay your offering. You whittle it down until it is barely a sliver, so light and fragile that a rat's weight will be enough to trip it. You carefully tie a piece of rough, twisted sinew to one end, the sinew having been painstakingly pulled from an old piece of leather. Your hands are rough and calloused, but they work with surprising dexterity. The sinew knotting neatly and tightly. You're not a craftsman, but necessity is teaching you. The tension in the sinew is everything. Too tight, and the rat will eat the bait without the trap going off. Too loose, and it will trip itself before a rat even gets a chance to approach. It's a game of millimeters, a duel of wits with a creature you've never even seen clearly. You make your way to the village church, a small stone building that smells of old incense and beeswax. It is a place of comfort and fear, a place where the human world and the divine world meet. You find the local priest, a large, weary man with a kind face and a heavy iron key hanging from his belt. You tell him your problem, and he listens, not with a look of surprise, but with a nod of solemn understanding. This is a common tale, a nightly struggle he has heard 100 times. The rats are not just a pest, they are a manifestation of a deeper chaos, a sign that the natural order is out of whack. They are, in a sense, a form of spiritual pollution, and they need to be cleansed. He agrees to help. You feel a strange mix of relief and foolishness. You're asking a man with a heavy book to solve a problem that your traps couldn't? It's like asking a librarian to fight a fire. For the spring. You need something with a little more give. The coil of rusted wire you have is too stiff. You find a bent piece of an old metal hoop that once held a barrel together. With a grunt, you hold one end of it with your foot and bend it. A thin, metallic squeal protesting the action. You work it back and forth, the cold metal warming under the friction of your hands until it finally has the perfect, springy arc you need. This will be the kill bar, the final, decisive element. You attach it to the wooden base, another careful knot of sinew holding it fast. You think to yourself that this is probably more effort than some people put into their marriages. It's an intricate little machine, made from nothing but trash and ingenuity, and you feel a strange pride in it. The priest's solution is a grim and theatrical performance, a spiritual exorcism for pests. A common historical fact is that priests in the Middle Ages would sometimes perform a ritual known as the excommunication of pests. This was not just a simple prayer, but a formal legalistic process. The priest would go to the field or a town square, and in a loud, booming voice, he would address the pests directly. He would command them to leave, in the name of the church, threatening them with excommunication if they did not. You stand there, a small group of villagers gathered around, listening as the priest speaks to the air, to the unseen creatures under your feet. He warns them that if they do not leave, their bodies will be devoured by birds and their souls will be cast into hell. It's a bizarre sight, but you can't help but feel a flicker of hope. This isn't just about killing them. It's about removing their spiritual right to be in your home. It's a very medieval approach to pest control, a kind of ecclesiastical eviction notice. You're thinking that this is probably the most complicated spiritual life a rat has ever had, and you can only hope that their tiny little souls are listening. The final piece is the bait. You can't just put out a scrap of old cheese. You know they won't be fooled by such a simple offering. These rats have seen it all. They've probably turned their noses up at better scraps. It needs to be something with a pungent, irresistible smell. You find a piece of rancid fat from a pig you butchered last week. The smell a little too strong for a human nose, but perfect for a rat's. You take a sliver and carefully affix it to the trigger mechanism, the grease clinging to the wood. You're thinking that this is a 5-star dining experience for a rat. Probably their equivalent of a feast fit for a king, even if the king is a scruffy peasant who's had a rough week. You set the trap with a final trembling touch. The kill bar is held back, resting on the delicately balanced trigger. It is a thing of grim beauty, a tiny engine of vengeance. But what if the priest can't come to your home every night? You need a more personal solution, a constant, low-level divine protection. This is where a more unique and little-known folk remedy comes in. The priest, seeing your desperation, takes a small piece of parchment from his pouch. On it, he has written a short prayer to Saint Gertrude of Nivelles, the patron saint of cats, gardeners, and, by extension, a powerful intercessor against the plague of mice and rats. The prayer is a simple, beautiful thing, a few lines of Latin that ask for her protection. He folds it carefully, and he tells you to put it in a small, empty nutshell. You are to place this nut in a place where the rats are most active, a silent spiritual landmine. You take the nut, and you go back to your home, a small, fragile piece of faith clutched in your hand. You kneel down by the fireplace, where you heard the sounds last night, and you place the nut there, a silent prayer on your lips. You're thinking that this is a lot of work for a nut, but you're also thinking that it's probably better than nothing. You place the trap in a dark corner, behind the heavy chest where you keep your winter clothes. This is a high-traffic area. You've heard the scurrying from there more than once. You go to bed, but you don't sleep. You're listening. Every little rustle, every creak of the cottage makes you hold your breath. You're waiting for the snap. The sounds of the night, which were once a source of weary resignation, are now a source of intense, anxious anticipation. You're playing a game, a very slow, very high-stakes game. The rat might win, it might steal the bait, or it might just ignore your trap completely. You can't help but think about how much easier it is to just buy a pre-made trap in the future, if such a thing ever exists. The act of placing the nut is a strange mix of faith and superstition. You can't help but think that a modern person would be laughing at you. You're fighting rats with a nut, they would say, but you're also thinking that they've never heard the silent, relentless scratching that you've heard, the sound that can drive a person mad. You look at your cat, who is now watching you with a strange look in its eyes. It's as if the cat is thinking, "What's with all the praying? Boss, I can handle this." You give the cat a gentle scratch behind the ears, a silent reassurance that you still trust it. The cat purrs, a low, rumbling sound that seems to fill the quiet room. You've got both a secular and a sacred army on your side now, and you feel for the first time that you're truly prepared for a long war. Then it comes. A sudden, sharp crack that echoes in the stillness of your small home. You sit bolt upright in your bed of straw, your heart hammering against your ribs. You grab the tallow candle, its flame a nervous, dancing light. You walk barefoot across the cold dirt floor, careful not to step on anything, and you approach the chest. The sight is grim. The kill bar is down, and the trap has done its work. The rancid piece of fat is gone, and so is the rat's bravado. You steel yourself, pick up the trap, and carry it outside, the body still twitching slightly. A last awful protest against your victory. You feel a strange mix of triumph and revulsion. You toss the body into the nearby refuse pit, a little graveyard of your enemies. The war is far from over, but you've won this battle. Historians still debate whether these ceremonial acts were a genuine belief in the power of the church to influence the natural world, or a more pragmatic form of social control and psychological comfort for a terrified populace. Did the priests truly believe they could excommunicate rats? Or was it a way to give people a sense of hope and agency in a world where they had none? It's a fascinating question, and one that we will likely never have a definitive answer to. It shows that even in a time of deep faith, there was a pragmatic, almost cynical side to life. You look at the little nut in its dark corner, and you think to yourself that it doesn't matter what the priest believed. What matters is that you believe it might work. What matters is that it gives you hope, a quiet comfort that allows you to get a few precious hours of sleep. You lie down in your bed, and you listen. The sounds are gone. The silent, squeaking echo from beneath the floorboards is gone. The quiet is a holy thing. The peace is a miracle. And for tonight, that's all that matters. You're thinking that if you ever get a chance to meet St. Gertrude, you'll owe her a lot more than a nutshell. You'll owe her a lifetime supply of your very best cheese. You close your eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, you sleep with the peace of a true believer. This gruesome but effective snap trap is a common historical fact of medieval life. But it wasn't the only solution. The snap trap was brutal and quick. But what if you didn't want the mess? Or what if you wanted to dispose of the creatures without getting your hands dirty? This is where a more insidious and ingenious device comes into play: the falling trap. Imagine a clay pot or a deep wooden box, something with tall, slick sides. You would place some grain or cheese at the bottom, something they would find irresistible. The rat would jump inside, eager for the prize, and then find itself unable to climb back out. The slick, sloped sides, perhaps coated with a layer of animal fat or oil, would ensure its capture. This was a common and effective method for pest control. You open the heavy, creaking door of your cottage, and the outside world rushes in. The air, which once felt thick with the constant buzz of unseen life, now feels charged with a new kind of energy. You've won the battle inside your home, but the war, you realize, is raging on an entirely different scale. You step out into the muddy, well-trodden street, and the sensory assault begins. The smell of wood smoke and damp earth is replaced by a cacophony of odors, the acrid stench of human and animal waste, the sweet, rotting smell of refuse, the faint, sour aroma of fermenting ale from the local tavern. The sounds are just as overwhelming. The low, constant hum of the village is now a high-pitched buzz of activity, a mix of vendors hawking their wares, children screaming in the distance, and beneath it all, the constant, shuffling sound of feet on the muddy ground. The grim detail about this type of trap is the aftermath. You didn't just have one angry, trapped rat. You often had several living in a terrified, close-quarters existence at the bottom of a pot. They would fight and gnaw at each other, their collective fear a palpable, buzzing thing. You would then have to figure out how to dispose of them. The easiest way was to simply take the pot down to the local river, or, well, submerge it and wait. The trapped rats would drown, their silent deaths a stark contrast to the noisy, fighting lives they had just been living. It's a method that speaks to a kind of practical cruelty, a cold, unfeeling efficiency that the realities of medieval life would have demanded. You weren't dealing with pets, you were dealing with a plague, and you had to do what was necessary. You look down and you see them everywhere, not just in the shadows, but out in the open. Rats, plump and bold, scuttling along the edges of the open gutters, their beady eyes glinting in the faint sunlight. They're a different breed out here. Not the secretive, nervous creatures you battled inside your home, but a confident, almost brazen population that seems to own the streets as much as the humans do. You see one, a particularly large specimen, drag a discarded fish head into a sewer grate with a kind of weary resignation. You think to yourself that this is the kind of rat that would look at your carefully laid apothecary poison and just laugh at you. This is the kind of rat that has seen it all, and it's probably planning a coup. You feel a sudden, profound sense of smallness. Your personal victory feels like trying to empty an ocean with a thimble. Historians still debate whether medieval rats, known for their intelligence, quickly learned to avoid these traps. Did the scent of a dead or trapped rat serve as a warning to the rest of the colony? Was it a constant evolutionary arms race, with the rats getting smarter and more cautious, and the peasants getting more cunning in their trap design? It's likely that the older, supposed more experienced rats quickly learned to avoid the most obvious dangers, leaving only the young and foolish to fall victim to your devices. This means you were always fighting an uphill battle, constantly having to invent new strategies and new traps just to keep up. This, you realize, is the public war against the rat horde. It's not just a personal struggle, it's a communal one. A common historical fact is that medieval towns and cities had to deal with the overwhelming problem of waste disposal, a problem that directly fueled the rat population. There were no public sanitation systems as you know them. Waste was often just thrown out the door and into the street, where it would be left to decompose or be eaten by roaming pigs and dogs. This created a literal feast for rats, an unending buffet that allowed them to multiply at an alarming rate. It's a grisly thought, but your daily walk to the market is a literal journey through a rat paradise. You have to be careful where you step, not just because of the mud, but because you might accidentally disturb a dozen rats having a nice family meal on a pile of discarded cabbage leaves. The battle against the rodents wasn't just a physical one, it was a psychological one. You had to learn to live with them, to accept their presence, and to fight them with a weary, constant resolve. The little victory you had with the snap trap feels good for a moment, but you know it's just that, a moment. You set another one, this time near the grain sack, a tiny replica of your first triumph. You go to bed, and you listen again, but this time, the anxiety is a little less sharp, replaced with a kind of grim, determined patience. The sounds of the night, the rustling in the thatch, and the skittering behind the walls are still there. But now you have a small engine of vengeance in the darkness, and you feel, for a moment at least, that the balance of power has shifted, if only slightly. The war against the rat horde is just getting started. And your arsenal is just a few pieces of wood and some wire, but it's a start. And for tonight, that's enough. This is where the guilds come in. The medieval guilds. Those powerful associations of craftsmen and merchants were not just concerned with the quality of their product. They were also deeply concerned with their public image, and that included keeping their surroundings clean. The Guild of Butchers, for example, had a particularly difficult problem. Their trade generated a massive amount of offal and blood, a veritable siren's call for rats. To combat this, they had specific rules about how to dispose of their waste. They were often required to discard it in a designated area, far away from the city center. And sometimes they were even required to pay a communal fee to have it carted away by cart drivers. The same was true for the bakers, who had to be careful with their discarded flour and bread scraps. These were not just professional guidelines. They were an act of public health, an acknowledgement that their business, if left unchecked, would turn the entire city into a festering, rat-infested nightmare. The snap of your trap was a satisfying sound, a tiny moment of triumph in a losing war. But as the days turn into nights, the scratching behind the walls returns with renewed vigor. You find a new hole gnawed in a sack of oats, a tiny, perfect circle of destruction that mocks your recent victory. You realize with a sinking feeling that this isn't a battle you can win alone. The enemy is too numerous, too relentless. Your homemade traps are like trying to stop a flood with a teacup. You need a specialist, a professional, someone whose entire life is dedicated to this dark, thankless trade. You see a guild-sanctioned cleanup in action. A group of men, members of the town's sanitation guild, are walking down the street, their faces grim under their heavy leather aprons. They are not carrying shovels. They are carrying long poles with nets at the end. Their leader, a man with a thick, bushy beard, is shouting orders, and the men are working in unison, sweeping the nets through the gutters, pulling out dead leaves, rotting vegetables, and, every so often, a rat. The rat, if it is still alive, is quickly dispatched with a heavy boot or a quick snap of the neck. You watch, horrified, but also a little impressed. This is not a personal struggle. This is a military operation. This is a group of men whose job is to literally sweep the streets of filth. And you have to wonder about the kinds of stories they have to tell at the end of the day. You're sure it's a lot more interesting than your stories about your cat. Probably involves a lot more heroic battles and a lot less purring. You've heard of such a man. A figure who lurks on the edges of the village. A pariah you would normally cross the street to avoid. He's the rat catcher, and his presence is both a mark of shame and a beacon of hope. You seek him out at the local tavern, a grimy establishment where he sits in a corner, nursing a tankard of cheap ale. He is not a man of grand stature. He's thin, wiry, with a face that looks like it's been chiseled from old wood. His clothes are a tapestry of patches and stains, and he carries a heavy, patched leather bag that looks like it's seen more plagues than a medieval doctor. His scent, a mix of sweat, old leather, and something musky and unidentifiable, hangs in the air around him. It's a smell that screams of his trade, of his constant proximity to the filth and decay of the world. This leads us to a particularly fascinating and often overlooked detail of public life, the role of the town crier. The town crier, a figure you normally associate with reading out royal decrees and public announcements, also had a more mundane but equally important function. He would often be called upon to announce a public rat hunt. These were not just spontaneous events. They were organized, community-wide affairs where every man, woman, and child was expected to participate. The town crier would walk through the streets, ringing his bell and shouting, "All citizens to arms, the rats must be vanquished, a prize for the largest kill." You can almost hear the excited buzz of the crowd, the sound of wooden mallets and old brooms being taken from their corners, the collective energy of a community coming together to fight a common enemy. It was a kind of macabre holiday, a day of fun and terror, and you're thinking that this is probably the closest thing they have to a modern-day sports tournament. Just, with more dead rodents. He looks up as you approach, his eyes small and sharp, like a terrier's. There is no warmth there, only a cold, professional assessment. You don't ask him his name, you don't even try to make small talk. You just tell him your problem. The scratching, the gnawing, the ruined food. He listens, not with sympathy, but with the quiet satisfaction of a man who knows his time has come. You are another desperate peasant, and he is the grim reaper of rodents? He nods, takes a final, long pull from his ale, and stands. He doesn't ask for payment up front. He knows you'll pay anything for a quiet night's sleep. He simply says, "Follow me." And you do, trudging behind him through the muddy streets, his boots making a soft, squelching sound that you'll come to associate with his work. The town authorities also took the matter of rats very seriously. passing laws and ordinances to enforce a communal standard of cleanliness. You recall a story you heard about a nearby town where a law was passed requiring all homeowners to keep a cat or a ferret in their home. The fine for not having a rodent-controlling animal was a sack of grain, a harsh punishment in a time when grain was a matter of life and death. You're also thinking about how the cat, which you saw as a pet, was now a matter of public policy. It was a tool of the state, a furry enforcer of the law. You're wondering if your cat, that scruffy, purring monster, has any idea of the legal and social significance of its existence? Probably not. It's probably just thinking about where its next nap is coming from. The rat catcher's tools are a fascinating, horrifying collection. He doesn't just rely on crude snares, he's a master of his craft. He carries a long, slender pole with a noose of thin wire on the end. It's a quick, efficient tool for pulling rats out of their holes without getting too close. He has a variety of nets, small but sturdy, for when he wants to catch them alive. His most trusted companion, however, is his dog, a small, scruffy terrier with an attitude problem. The dog is a blur of muscle and fury, its tail a constant, nervous wag. It's been bred for one purpose, and one purpose only: to kill rats. Its teeth are stained and its eyes are wild with a singular murderous intent. You watch as the rat catcher gives the dog a simple command, a low word that sounds more like a hiss, and the dog's ears perk up. It is a four-legged engine of pest control. A modern person would probably be calling animal cruelty services, but here, in the heart of the Middle Ages, that dog is the most valuable member of his team. A little rat-killing machine on four legs. Historians still debate whether these public rat hunts and communal cleanups were a genuine and effective solution to the rat problem, or if they were more of a symbolic gesture, a way for a community to feel like they were doing something about an intractable problem. Did a few days of frenzied hunting truly make a dent in the rat population? Or did the rats, with their quick breeding cycles and their subterranean network of tunnels, simply recover and come back stronger? It's a fascinating question, and one that we will likely never have a definitive answer to. It forces you to consider the role of ritual and symbolism in public life, and how a community can come together to fight a problem that is, in reality, too big to solve. You watch the men with their nets and poles, and you feel a strange sense of respect. They may not be winning the war, but they are fighting it with a kind of grim, determined resolve that you find deeply impressive. They are the heroes of this story, the nameless, faceless soldiers of the public health war. He enters your home, and his demeanor changes. The quiet apathy falls away, replaced by a focused intensity. He doesn't just look for rats, he looks for the signs of rats. He gets down on his hands and knees, his face uncomfortably close to the dirt floor, and he sniffs the air. He runs his hand along the bottom of the wall, feeling for the faint, greasy smear left behind by their bodies as they pass. He finds a tiny pile of what he calls rat spoor in a dark corner, a little deposit of tiny black pellets that you had not even noticed. He is a detective of decay, a forensic scientist of filth. You are amazed by his skill. You had been looking for a solution, but he has been speaking the language of rats his entire life. He knows their secrets. He knows their roots. He knows their fears. As you stand there watching the public battle unfold, you feel a kind of strange detachment. You've had your own private war, and you've won. For now. But you're also part of this larger war, a member of a community that is fighting a losing battle against a seemingly infinite foe. The noise of the city, the chaos, the smells, and the constant, low-level threat of vermin all seem to blur into one overwhelming sensory experience. You turn and head back to your cottage, your personal fortress. The door closes behind you with a reassuring thud, and the quiet returns. You look at your cat, who is now sleeping soundly by the hearth, a tiny, peaceful guardian. You have your private peace, a little island of calm in a sea of chaos. You're thinking that maybe that's all you can hope for. You can win your own battles. But the war, the one that's out there in the streets, that one is never truly over. You sit down by the fire, and you close your eyes. The quiet, a fragile and beautiful thing that you have earned. This is where the less known, but deeply fascinating, detail of his profession comes in. To prove his success and to advertise his services, The rat catcher would often perform a public ritual. He would tie the tails of his kills together and hang them from a long pole, parading them through the streets of the village. It was a grim, macabre spectacle, a sort of medieval victory lap. The sight of a dozen or more dead rats, their tails knotted together in a grotesque display, would be a sign to all that a rat catcher had done his job. It was a tangible, undeniable proof of his work. The children would run after him, a mix of terror and excitement on their faces. It was a public service, but a gruesome one, a reminder of the ever-present threat of plague and famine that lurked in the shadows. He's essentially a one-man public health announcement, with a pole full of dead rats as his megaphone. You think to yourself that this is probably not a job that will get you a lot of dates. But it certainly gets the job done. The silence in your cottage is a precious, hard-won thing. But as you step out of your door and into the bustling marketplace, you are immediately reminded of the world you've left behind. The air is alive with the smells of roasted meat, fresh baked bread, and the pungent tang of drying fish. And underneath it all, a familiar, unsettling smell, the scent of decay, of something just on the edge of spoiling. You see it everywhere? A butcher, his face a mask of weary anger, points a knife at a sack of grain that has been chewed through, a cascade of precious kernels spilling onto the muddy ground. A merchant, a wealthy woman with a bright red sash, is inspecting a bolt of wool with a frown, her fingers tracing a tiny, clean tear in the fabric. The rats, it seems, have been busy. You watch him work. He sets his traps not where you think they should go, but in places you wouldn't have considered. He doesn't just put bait out, he spreads a fine layer of flour over a small patch of floor near the wall. He waits a moment, and then he checks it. Tiny, almost invisible rat footprints are all over the flour. He's not guessing, he's tracking. He's an expert in rodent topography. He works his way through your cottage, his dog a constant, tense presence at his side, its nose twitching with a nervous energy that promises violence. The sounds of the night, which had been a constant source of anxiety for you, are a map for him. He listens to the rustling in the thatch and knows exactly where to place his long pole with the wire noose. He climbs a rickety wooden ladder, and you hear a brief, furious struggle, a soft squeal, and then silence. He comes down, a small, still body in the noose, and drops it into his leather bag with a thud. This is the hidden cost of rats, the real and devastating toll they take on an entire community. It's not just a matter of a little scratching in the walls or a few nibbled turnips. A common historical fact of medieval life is that rats were a primary cause of economic devastation. They were a constant threat to the entire food supply. They would feast on the grain stored in the granaries, ruining entire harvests in a single winter. A single rat could contaminate a massive amount of food, and their prodigious appetites meant that a small colony could consume a shocking amount of grain in a very short time. To lose a sack of grain wasn't just to lose a meal. It was to lose a season's worth of labor, a family's winter supply, a merchant's entire profit. You watch the butcher, his hands shaking with impotent fury, and you feel a profound sense of empathy. His personal war, you realize, is far more desperate than your own. This brings up a serious and ongoing debate among historians. Did the rat catchers, who were often paid per tale, have a vested interest in the rat's survival? Did they secretly breed rats or hoard them to ensure they always had work? It's a fascinating question, and one that we will likely never have a definitive answer to. The sources are silent on the matter, but the logic is sound. A successful rat catcher could, in theory, create his own permanent job security. He could release a few rats into the village every few weeks, just enough to keep the population high and the villagers desperate for his services. The rat catcher, a man on the fringes of society, would have a powerful incentive to keep the problem alive. It makes you look at him in a new light. Is he your savior? Or is he a kind of terrible, necessary parasite? Is he protecting you? Or is he farming you for your fear? You hand him a piece of stale bread and a small coin, and you can't help but wonder. The problem, however, extended far beyond just food. Rats were a threat to all forms of property. They would chew through leather goods, ruining harnesses, shoes, and saddles. They would gnaw through wood, weakening the foundations of homes and businesses. They would tear apart expensive wool and linen to make their nests. turning a merchant's entire stock into useless rags. You see the merchant with the torn wool, and you can almost feel her frustration. That wool was probably imported from Flanders, a long and expensive journey that had just been ruined by a few tiny teeth. The constant gnawing presence of rats was a kind of slow-motion economic plague, a low-level, unceasing drain on the resources of every person in the village, from the poorest peasant to the wealthiest merchant. After a few hours of relentless, quiet work, he is done. He stands in the middle of your cottage, his dog sitting quietly at his feet. The scratching is gone. The rustling is gone. The silence is a physical thing, a thick blanket of peace that you had forgotten even existed. The air, which once felt so thick with the buzzing of unseen life, now feels empty, clean. He holds out his hand, and you pay him, not in coin, which is a rare luxury, but with a small pouch of flour, some dried meat, and a promise of a new tunic once you can afford to have one made. He takes his payment and leaves, a silent, shadowy figure disappearing back into the night. His work is done. Your problem is solved. For now. But you know he will be back. He is a part of your life, a permanent fixture in the endless cycle of decay and rebirth that is the Middle Ages. You look around your quiet cottage, and you feel a sense of relief so profound it almost makes you cry. Then you see a tiny, barely visible footprint in a dusting of flour by the hearth, a sign that they were here, that they are still here, and that the war is never truly over. And you know you'll be seeing the rat catcher again? Probably sooner than you'd like. You think about your own cottage, your own personal fortress, and you realize that your peace is fragile. It's a tiny island of calm in a sea of economic chaos. The price of food, of clothing, of everything you need to survive, is constantly being driven up by the rats. You may have won the battle in your home, but you are still a victim of the war that rages in the streets. You're a prisoner in a sense, a person whose life is being shaped by the actions of a million tiny, furry monsters. You're walking through the marketplace, and you feel a kind of grim resignation. This is your reality, a world where the cost of living is directly proportional to the number of rats in the gutters. You pass a small, unassuming shop, the air smelling of old paper and dust. You see the shopkeeper, a small, hunched man, meticulously patching a hole in a leather-bound book. The book, you realize, is not just a piece of paper. It's a lifetime's worth of stories, of knowledge, of history, all of it threatened by a single, tiny rodent. The profound silence that settled over your cottage after the rat catcher left was a temporary, expensive luxury. You look around, and you can still see the little smudges of grime and the tiny, black pellets he pointed out to you. The war might be over for now, but the enemy still lurks just outside your door, and you can't afford a professional pest control specialist every single week. You need a long-term solution. You need a permanent sentry, a low-cost, high-efficiency predator that will work for a few scraps and a warm place to sleep. You don't need a cat. This is where the law stepped in. The problem became so severe and so economically devastating that it required a new, more forceful approach. It could no longer be a personal, private battle. It had to be a communal, legally enforced one. A particularly fascinating and little-known detail is that in some medieval towns, like the fictional one we'll call Gremwald, there were specific legal statutes regarding rat control. These were not vague, moralistic decrees. They were explicit, enforceable laws. The law, for example, it might have stated that every citizen was legally required to fill in all rat holes in the walls of their property, and to keep their grain stores on a raised platform. The penalty for not doing so was a fine, often a hefty one that would be levied by the local bailiff. It was a kind of medieval code enforcement, a set of regulations designed to ensure that everyone was doing their part to fight the good fight. You are not just a homeowner, you are a citizen with a legal obligation to be a rat fighter. You've always been a bit wary of cats. They are strange, independent creatures, full of a quiet grace that feels alien to the noisy, messy rhythm of your life. But you've seen them in the stables of the lord of the manor, stalking through the grain stores with an air of cold, professional detachment. They are not pets, they are living tools, an essential part of the agricultural economy. You set your mind to it. You hear a rumor that your neighbor's cat, a scruffy ginger tom with a perpetually annoyed expression, has just had a new litter of kittens. You go to their cottage, the air smelling of fresh bread and damp wool, and you ask for one. Your neighbor, a woman with rough hands and a tired smile, gestures to a small basket by the hearth. The kittens, a wriggling mass of fur and tiny mewling sounds, are almost impossibly cute. You pick one up, a small black kitten with eyes the color of pale jade, and it lets out a tiny, high-pitched purr that vibrates through your fingers. This is it. Your new partner in the war against the rats? You see a bailiff, a large, imposing man in a leather tunic, walking through the streets with a stern expression. He is not just a lawman, he is a health inspector, a rodent control officer, all rolled into one. He stops in front of a small cottage, its walls visibly pockmarked with holes and tunnels. He knocks on the door, and a nervous-looking woman answers. You can't hear what he is saying, but you can see the severity of his expression, the way he points at the holes in her wall. He is a terrifying figure, a man with the power to take away your last coin for a crime you didn't even know you were committing. The law, you realize, is a powerful weapon in this war, a way of forcing people to care about a problem they might otherwise ignore. You look at your own walls, their new, gritty texture now a source of relief and pride, and you realize that you were not just fighting for your own peace. You were obeying the law, and you were a good citizen. You bring the kitten home, a tiny bundle of potential predator clutched to your chest. For the first few weeks, it's more of a liability than a help. It gets underfoot, it meows for milk, and it spends most of its time sleeping. You feel a flicker of doubt. Did you just add another mouth to feed? A tiny, furry parasite that will do nothing but lounge around and look cute. Then, one night, you are woken not by the familiar scratching behind the wall, but by a different sound. A soft, guttural growl, followed by a sharp, terrible squeak. You light your candle, your heart pounding with a mix of fear and curiosity. In the dim light, you see the kitten, no longer a helpless furball, but a miniature hunter. Its tiny body crouched over a still twitching field mouse. Its eyes are wide and focused, and its teeth are bared in a grim, silent snarl. It is a moment of pure, raw nature in the middle of your home, and you realize with a thrill that you have made the right choice. This creature is not a pet, it is a monster, and it is on your side. This brings us to a serious and ongoing debate among historians. Were these laws a genuine and effective solution to the rat problem? Or were they primarily a means for the local lord or town council to raise revenue a fine for a rat hole? In a time of poverty and hardship, could be a significant source of income. Did the bailiff, in his inspections, truly care about the rats? Or was he just looking for an excuse to collect a fine? Were the laws a sincere attempt at public health? Or were they a kind of institutionalized shakedown, a way of preying on the poorest and most vulnerable members of society? It's a fascinating question, and one that we will likely never have a definitive answer to. It forces you to consider the complex relationship between power, law, and public health in the Middle Ages. For you, watching the bailiff and the nervous woman, the answer doesn't matter. What matters is the fear in her eyes. The knowledge that her poverty, her inability to fix her walls, has just cost her a part of her food supply. The laws, you realize, are a double-edged sword. They can protect you, but they can also destroy you. The cat grows quickly, its hunting instincts sharpening with every passing day. You stop hearing the scratching. You stop seeing the tiny, greasy smears on the walls. The cat has established a perimeter, a silent, furry security guard that works tirelessly through the night. Its presence alone is often enough to deter a rat from even entering your cottage. The scent of a predator, the silent, watchful gaze, is a powerful weapon in itself. The cat patrols your home like a soldier, its movements fluid and silent, its tail held high in an expression of quiet confidence. It brings you its kills, leaving them by the hearth as an offering, a tribute to its usefulness. You often have to dispose of the little corpses, a task that still makes your stomach turn, but it's a small price to pay for the peace and quiet. You walk back to your cottage, the marketplace a memory of chaos and fear. You close your door behind you, and the quiet returns. But it's a different kind of quiet now. It's the quiet of a community that is fighting a war, not just with their traps and their cats, but with their laws, their fines, and their collective, weary resolve. Your personal victory feels a little hollow now, a small moment of triumph in a war that is so much bigger than you. You look at your fortified walls and you no longer see a personal shield. You see a public duty, a legal requirement, a sign that you are a member of a community that is fighting for its very survival. You sit down by the fire, and you close your eyes, and you can still hear the bailiff's stern voice, the woman's nervous stammer, and the constant, low-level buzz of the marketplace. You have peace, yes, but you have it at a price. And you know that the price, like the rats, is always there. This leads us to a fascinating detail about the feline-human relationship in the Middle Ages. Cats were not just appreciated, they were highly valued, so much so that laws were passed to protect them. In some medieval Welsh law codes, for example, the value of a cat was explicitly stated, and there were different fines for killing a kitten versus an adult cat. If a cat was killed, the person responsible would be liable to pay a fine. This shows that the value of the cat was not sentimental, but economic. It was an essential part of the household's defenses, a crucial member of the household economy. A cat, in essence, was a form of living insurance, protecting your grain, your clothing, and your family from disease and starvation. This is a common historical fact of medieval life. The silence in your cottage is no longer just the absence of sound. It's a living thing. It's a silence earned through hard labor, cunning, and a kind of desperate faith. You sit by your hearth, the fire casting dancing shadows on your gritty, pottery-laced walls. Your cat, a veteran of countless small battles, sleeps curled by the warmth, a tiny, purring guardian of your peace. The scratching, the gnawing, the constant, low-level anxiety that was once your constant companion has been replaced by a kind of quiet vigilance. You know the peace is temporary. You know that somewhere out there, in the damp streets and the dark alleys, the rats are still thriving, still multiplying, still waiting for their chance to invade again. Your story, you realize, is not one of victory, but of a never-ending, exhausting struggle. But cats weren't the only animals on the payroll. Ferrets, small, slinky predators with a ferocious hunting drive, were also commonly used. Unlike cats, which were mostly for indoor use, ferrets were for the heavy lifting. You would take a ferret and let it loose in the grain silo or in the burrow of a rat. The ferret, with its long, serpentine body and its single-minded focus, would follow the rats into their tunnels, flushing them out and often killing them inside the burrows. You would stand at the entrance of the burrow with a net, waiting for the terrified rats to flee, and you would catch them and kill them. It was a more active, hands-on form of pest control, but it was incredibly effective. A ferret, with its high-pitched chittering and its lightning-fast movements, was a perfect tool for getting into places a cat simply could not. A modern person might think of a ferret as a cute pet, but a medieval person would see it for what it was, a ruthless killing machine, a biological weapon against the rodent horde. You think back on your journey, the crude ingenuity of your first traps, the snap of the metal bar, a shocking jolt of triumph, the grim professionalism of the rat catcher, a man whose life was a testament to the fact that some problems are too big for one person to solve, the silent, lethal efficiency of your cat, a creature that asked for nothing but a warm place to sleep and a few scraps of food in exchange for its endless service, the pungent, foul-smelling remedies of the apothecary, a kind of dark, medieval science that you were desperate enough to try, the back-breaking work of fortifying your home, of turning your simple cottage into a fortress of clay and stone. And finally, the prayers and the holy whispers, the desperate, theatrical plea to a higher power to solve a very earthly problem. It was an arsenal of solutions, a panoply of desperation. And yet, you know in your heart, it was never enough. Historians still debate whether the use of cats and other animals was a net positive for public health, especially when it came to the plague. While cats and dogs did a great job of killing rats, they also carried fleas, which, as we now know, were the primary vectors for the bubonic plague. Did the cats, in their relentless pursuit of rats, inadvertently bring the fleas, and thus the disease, closer to the human population? Did they, in essence, make the problem worse even as they solved the rat problem? It's a grisly paradox, and one that we will likely never have a clear answer to. It forces you to consider the unintended consequences of your actions, and the cruel irony of a solution that might also be a source of the very problem you are trying to solve. You get to the end of a long, hard day, and you're tired, you've had a few successful hunts, and you feel a sense of peace. You're rubbing the back of your cat's neck, its low purr a rumbling engine of contentment, and you can't help but wonder, is this soft, purring thing a savior? Or is it a silent, ticking time bomb? You'll probably never know, and you're too tired to care. For now, the house is quiet, and the rats are gone. That is enough. A common historical fact, now a part of your daily reality, is that the rats you were fighting weren't all the same. The black rat, or Rattus rattus, was the dominant species for centuries, a lithe, nimble climber that lived in the thatch of roofs and the rafters of homes. But a new species was on the rise, a bigger, bolder, and more aggressive competitor, the brown rat, or Rattus norvegicus. This new breed, a burrower by nature, lived in the sewers and the damp earthen floors, a constant subterranean menace. Your war was not just with one enemy, but with a constantly evolving interspecies conflict that you were caught in the middle of. It's a strange thing to think about, a kind of grand biological war being waged just beneath your feet, and you are just a small, insignificant player in it. You think to yourself that this is probably a lot more interesting than the local politics you have to deal with, even if it is a lot more terrifying. The tiny, purring engine of death that is your cat has brought you a fragile peace. The scratching has subsided, and for a few blessed weeks, your home has felt like a fortress again. You've even started to sleep a little better, no longer waking in a cold sweat at every creak of the floorboards. But you notice something new. The cat won't go near the small space behind the massive, carved wooden wardrobe where you keep your winter blankets. It hisses at the dark, narrow gap, its tail twitching with a nervous energy it never shows anywhere else. You've tried to lure it there with a scrap of meat, but it refuses to budge. The cat, it seems, has found a line it will not cross. It has its limits, and a stubborn, possibly very large, rat has found a sanctuary it will not leave. The war, you realize with a sigh, is far from over. It's time for a new tactic. You can't rely on claws and teeth alone. It's time for science, or at least the medieval equivalent of it. This leads us to a truly bizarre and almost unbelievable historical detail: the formal trials of rats. In some parts of medieval Europe, when a community was suffering from a particularly bad rat infestation, they would take the pests to court. Yes, you heard that right. They would hold a trial, complete with a prosecuting attorney and, in some cases, a lawyer appointed to defend the rats. The rats, who would of course not show up for their day in court, would be found guilty in absentia and formally excommunicated by the church. The idea was that by formally charging them with a crime and condemning them, the community was giving them a legal and spiritual reason to leave. It's a fascinating and almost comedic example of a community using the only tools they had, their legal and religious systems, to deal with a problem that was completely beyond their control. You can almost imagine the defense lawyer, a nervous man in a dusty robe, trying to argue for his client's innocence, a kind of legal stand-up comedy that would have been completely lost on the rats themselves. You're thinking that this is probably the most complicated legal life a rat has ever had, and you can only hope that their defense lawyer was at least paid in cheese. You make your way to the village apothecary, a woman of great wisdom and even greater mystery. Her cottage, tucked away from the main thoroughfare, smells of 1,000 different things: dried lavender, pungent spices from far-off lands, and a faint acrid smell that makes your nose wrinkle. She sits at a heavy wooden table, a veritable library of jars and pouches spread before her. Each one contains a different powder, a different herb, a different part of some unfortunate animal. You explain your problem: the scratching, the cat's refusal to engage, the sense of a hidden enemy that is laughing at you from behind the furniture. She listens with a patient, knowing smile, her eyes twinkling in the dim light. She's seen it all before. She is a purveyor of health, yes, but also a professional problem solver. A kind of medieval pest control pharmacist. Historians still debate whether these desperate methods the rat hunts, The laws, the rituals, and the trials were a genuine and effective solution to the rat problem, or if they were primarily a form of psychological comfort for a populace that felt powerless. Did the rat hunts truly make a dent in the population? Or was it just a way to vent some collective frustration? Did the legal and spiritual rituals actually work? Or were they just a way to give people a sense of control over a problem that was, in reality, a matter of sanitation and biology? It's a debate that highlights the fine line between pragmatism and superstition, and it forces you to consider the role of ritual in human life. For you, sitting by the fire with your peaceful cat, the answer doesn't matter. What matters is that they gave you a sense of hope, a sense that you were not alone in your struggle, and a sense that you had some agency in a world that was constantly trying to take it away from you. She reaches for a small pouch and pulls out a dark, powdery substance, and she calls it hellebore. A common historical fact is that hellebore, a poisonous plant that was readily available and easy to grow, was one of the most popular substances used to poison rats. It was easy to mix with flour or ground barley, and it was lethally effective. But you can't just give a rat a plate of poison and expect it to eat it. They're not idiots. The bait needs to be irresistible. She takes a handful of what she calls rat's favorite things ground oats, a little bit of tallow fat, and a few drops of rancid fish oil. She mixes it all together in a small clay bowl, the mixture turning a dark, unappetizing color. It smells so foul that you have to turn your head away. She explains that this is a 5-star meal for a rat. The taste of the hellebore will be masked by the powerful stench of the fish oil, and the fat will make it a deliciously rich treat. You can't help but think that the rats probably have a better culinary experience than you do most of the time. What with all the delicious poisoned fish oil you are now providing for them? But as you sit there, you also begin to see the larger picture. You begin to see how your desperate medieval methods laid the foundation for the world you now inhabit. Your back-breaking work of fortifying your walls and raising your floor was the first clumsy step toward modern building codes and public health standards. The rat catcher, with his grotesque pole of dead rats, was a kind of medieval public health official, a man whose work was a vital part of the community's survival. The town's communal rat hunts and legal ordinances were the first rudimentary steps toward a communal understanding of public health. The first shaky attempts to fight a problem with a collective will. The apothecary, with her strange mix of herbs and poisons, was a kind of proto-chemist. A woman whose experiments, however crude, were the beginning of modern pest control. She gives you a solemn warning. This is not something to be trifled with. You must be careful. You must place the bait where the cat cannot reach it, where the children cannot find it, and where the chickens will not peck at it. You must be precise and you must be methodical. This is a weapon, and like any weapon, it can harm the innocent as well as the guilty. The gravity of the moment settles over you. You're about to become an agent of death, a bringer of silent, chemical warfare. You have gone from a simple trapper to a full-on assassin, and you feel a strange mix of power and fear. The apothecary is your quartermaster, and you are her soldier in this quiet, unseen war. You realize that your struggle was not in vain. It was a brutal, relentless, and often futile fight. But it was a fight that taught you a series of lessons that would be passed down from generation to generation. The lesson that cleanliness is a form of defense. The lesson that a communal problem requires a communal solution. The lesson that the smallest, most insignificant creatures can have a profound impact on the course of human history. The rats, in a strange and terrible way, were a kind of teacher, a constant, low-level threat that forced you to evolve, to adapt, to build a world that was a little cleaner, a little safer, and a little more resilient. You're thinking that this is a strange legacy, a kind of quiet, invisible heroism that you will never be remembered for. You will never be in a history book, but the things you did, the lessons you learned, they will be. But what about the more unorthodox methods? What about something to just make them leave? This is where she reveals the unusual detail, a less-known piece of folk wisdom that speaks to the creativity of medieval pest control. She takes another pouch, this one filled with a substance that looks and smells like nothing you have ever encountered. It's a mix of burnt horn, the ground-up bile of a sheep, and a handful of dried herbs like rue and wormwood. This is her rat repellent, a foul, pungent substance she instructs you to sprinkle liberally around the areas you want the rats to avoid. The idea, she explains, is to make the space so utterly unappealing, so deeply offensive to a rat's sensitive nose, that it will simply decide to pack up and find a new home. You think to yourself that a modern person would probably just call it a really strong-smelling cleaning product that doesn't actually clean anything. But here, in the dim light of the apothecary's cottage, it feels like a powerful magic. You can almost see the rats running in terror from the smell of burnt sheep bile. You stand up, your bones aching with the memory of 100 small battles. The fire has died down to a faint glow, and the room is filled with a soft, comforting darkness. Your cat, a tiny, peaceful warrior, is still sleeping. It's breathing a soft, rhythmic sound in the stillness. The cottage is quiet. The streets outside are quiet. The world is quiet. And in that quiet, you feel a profound sense of peace. You have done all you can do, and the world is a little safer for it. You lie down in your bed, on your straw mattress that now feels a little more like a home, and you close your eyes. The story is over, but the lessons will last a lifetime. Now you can relax. Let the images of sneaking mice, crude wooden traps, and predatory cats fade into the darkness. The story is over, but the peace in your little house remains. It is a peace created by silent efforts, unseen battles. Listen to the gentle wind blowing through the thatched roof, the crackling of embers in the fireplace. Let those familiar sounds lull you to sleep. This peace was earned by you, by your own hands, by perseverance, and by a little luck. Don't think about what happened. Don't worry about tomorrow. Just take a deep breath, feel the warmth of the fire, and let your body sink into rest. Everything is okay. Now there is only the silence of the night. The apothecary also tells you about other, more esoteric remedies. She mentions a concoction of cat's droppings, wine, and honey, which she claims is a surefire way to kill a rat. Another one involves mixing the crushed seeds of an apple with milk and leaving it out for them. She explains that the seeds contain a tiny amount of poison, but in a large enough dose, they can be lethal. It's a kind of slow, insidious poison that will not kill them outright, but will make them sick and weak, making them easy prey for your cat or for another trap. You're starting to see that this isn't just about traps and poison. It's a whole philosophical approach to pest control, a kind of dark art that has been passed down for generations.